November 24th, pursuant to the City of Roanoke Emergency Ordinance adopted by the Roanoke Valley Transportation Planning Organization Policy Board on April 23rd, 2020, and the 2020 Virginia General Assembly, legislation H-29 enacted April 24th, 2020, special called meeting of the Roanoke Valley Transportation Planning Organization will be virtually held via Zoom today. The purpose of this special meeting is to review a proposed adjustment to the RVTPO's fiscal year 21 through 26 Surface Transportation Block Grant Financial Plan. Under the current state of emergency and until further notice, it has been deemed unsafe to assemble a quorum of a public body in one place. Any members of the public may view and participate in the meeting through electronic means. Meeting details are listed on the second page of the agenda. All materials made available to the members will be made available to the public at the same time by posting on the RVARC website. Welcome for those just now joining us. And Wayne, at this time, would like to call the meeting to order and ask for a roll call.
Mr. Johnson, Mr. Clinton and Mr. Martin will not be with us because they have a Board of Supervisors meeting this afternoon. Mr. Bestpitch?
Here.
Mr. Cobb?
Here.
Mr. Fidgelowski?
Here.
Mr. North?
Here.
Mr. Redford?
Present.
Ms. Turk? Mr. Jones? Mr. Lyles? Mr. Stovall? Mr. King?
Here.
Mr. Price? Mr. Bradshaw? Mr. Sonneckler?
Present.
We have a quorum, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Wayne. At this time, we'll move along on the agenda to item 2, approval of adjustment number 1 to the FY 2021 through 26 Surface Transportation Block Grant Financial Plan. And Chair recognizes Christina Finch and the VDOT staff.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. We were hoping to have someone from VDOT available to explain the request. I see that Mr. King is on the line. Don't know if Mr. King, you'd like to speak to the request.
I certainly can. So in general, at a high level, that is, even though I didn't realize I'd be the one to speak to the agenda item, but that's okay. So essentially what has been going on about and I'll put this in a broad context as it relates to some information I've shared with you in our previous meetings about how we're able to keep the 6-year plan improvement projects moving forward without delaying projects, even amidst this financial kind of impact we've had from COVID in terms of the revenues coming in, obviously less than what was anticipated, before the COVID situation came about. And the basis of that actually is a pretty big cash balance. About 24 months ago, we were really quite worried and somewhat wringing our hands. We had about a $500 million, so $500 million cash balance in the local programs area. These would be the areas that are predominantly revenue sharing and other types of local funds. And it was funds that local governments had received through various initiatives and grants and things of that nature. But they had not developed the project to a point to execute the project and actually begin to spend down those balances. And so it's kind of that combination of looking at, allocation, the receipt and allocation of funds, and then the cash flow management of financial management of spending that kind of a pay as you go, so you don't have a large cash balance. And we had noticed that, over a period of time, we had a significant cash balance form because of these projects. Many of the projects with revenue sharing and the like are, where they receive the money and they continue to seek other types of grant opportunities, and they're kind of assembling the amount of funds needed to then begin to move forward with the execution of the project. So that was a significant concern to us. As it turns out, that's actually been our golden parachute here in Virginia, because what the General Assembly just approved and the governor signed is the ability for us to pull from that cash balance to be able to spend that money to keep the projects that are currently active moving forward on time and on budget. And we'll use that pretty good sized cash balance to do that. The projects that are going to need that money in the future we'll have future allocations to repay those projects so that they have the money needed to pay down whatever sort of cash expenditure they have at that time. So it's just a more strategic and active management from a cash flow perspective. So the request that came from our financial management office and central office to the TPO here is really along the same vein. We have a number of projects at the TPO that have been proposed to use RSTP funds as leveraged dollars toward, greater smart scale funding. But the money that we identified was money in recent or in current years, in the next 1 or 2 years, when the project expenditures are not anticipated for maybe 3 or 4 more years out. So the request that came was for us to look to try to do a cash management kind of exercise to remove the allocation that we have on those projects that are really future projects, remove that from, say, the next 2 or 3 fiscal year monies that we're not actually going to spend them in those years, and instead try to put those on projects that are active today or more likely to spend the dollars more quickly, and then have these future projects be represented by future allocation funds. So therefore, we're putting dollars to the projects closer to the year in which the cash will actually be needed to pay for, and buy down the expenses relative to that project. So this is one example of a much larger issue of where really at the federal government and at the state government, and certainly while this $500 million has certainly been a golden parachute for VDOT, we do recognize that the proper financial management of these programs is to not, have large cash balances, setting in government coffers, but rather, be, planning and allocating those funds for the expenditures to take place in the same year that the money is there. And so we're working both in these types of initiatives with the allocation of funds with our MPOs and TPOs, but also we're also working with each of the localities to try to identify ways through which we can better, maintain the cash management of the funds that's within our overall programs. So the request came from our financial and administrative offices for the purposes that I've broadly described. I'll be glad to answer any questions, but that's it in a broad nutshell.
Mr. King, thank you so much for filling in. I know you were put on the spot there. I had not heard who from VDOT would be available to speak. And so I saw you present. So thank you for filling in there. I understand also that the urgency of this request is that in order for the funds that were allocated in the earlier years to be considered for those applications that are seeking smart scale funding, that money needs to be shown appropriately within the 6-year financial plan in order for the money to be counted towards match leverage in the smart scale process, which is why we are not able to review this item during the board's annual adjustment process, which normally happens starting in January next year. So just to review for anyone who might be new, I'm not sure that we have any of our newer board members on the line right now, but the STBG funds are federal dollars with a state match given to transportation management areas such as the RVTPO to use as it deems appropriate. So procedures were put in place when the TPO first received the funds many years ago, and over time the procedures have incorporated additional oversight to provide the checks and balances desired by the board for the management of the funding. Normally, according to the board's policy, allocation shifts such as this would only require concurrence from the project sponsors, VDOT, and the TTC in order to be approved. Because this request involves shifting funds outside of the first 2 years, which designates a committed status per the TPO's STBG policy, it requires approval of the board to waive the policy and to affirm your commitment to those committed amounts noted in the financial plan. You have the resolution there in front of you. And it was noted that there is one small error in it. The second bullet point should say remove 100,000 from FY22 and add it to FY24 instead of FY23. So we are asking for the board to consider approval of this resolution as presented.
Thank you, Ms. Finch. Does anyone have any other questions on the resolution and the chart that's provided?
Mr. North, Bill Bespich. I
Yes,
just want to make sure I understand it. Christina, you're saying that the Route 19, 419 project, that we need to amend a little bit in the resolution?
Yes, Mr. Bestfitch, that bullet point, it's summarizing the changes being made. And so the 100,000 that's currently shown as FY22 would need to get moved to FY24, not 23 as shown in the resolution right now.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I would move to make that amendment to the resolution.
and we have a motion to make that amendment. Is there a second?
Second.
Wayne, do we need a roll call on that change?
No, sir, I don't believe so. I think on the full adjustment, we will need a roll call.
Now this will provide the resolution is in sync with the attached chart, Christina, if I observe that to be correct. And by the way, this was the bill, this with Bill Bespich, this was the 419 Streetscape Improvements Phase 2. This wasn't a larger project on the diverting diamond.
Right, yeah.
Okay, Wayne, I believe we can go ahead and
Well, we should have a vote, Mr. North.
vote on the resolution.
Right, the change that we could have the vote that Mr. Bestpitch proposed, just a vote, just to make sure
Sure.
everybody's in agreement about that one change. And then we'll have the full vote on the adjustment.
Let's go ahead and call a roll then on that one change.
Okay, and we know Mr. Johnson's joined us. Mr. Johnson,
Yes.
Mr. Bestpitch,
Yes.
Mr. Cobb,
Yes.
Mr. Fizilowski,
Yes.
Mr. North,
Yes,
Mr. Radford,
Yes.
Mr. King,
Yes.
Mr. Sonicler.
Yes.
The motion passes for that change.
thank you, Wayne.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes,
if we don't have any more questions, I'll make the motion to approve the resolution to the adjustment number 1 for the fiscal year 2021 to 26 as the resolution is stated.
thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion on the motions? If not, Wayne, please call the roll.
Mr. Johnson,
Yes.
Mr. Bestpitch,
Yes.
Mr. Cobb,
Yes.
Mr. Fizilowski,
Yes.
Mr. North,
Yes,
Mr. Radford,
Yes.
Mr. King,
Yes.
Mr. Sonicler.
Yes.
The motion passes, Mr.
thank
Chair.
you, Wayne. Item number 3, comment period. Does anyone have any comments on what we've just discussed today?
Mr. Chair,
Yes,
I would suggest that an item that certainly I will, partner with Christine and others to look at some point in time. We should look at this process. And I know I was certainly supportive when we put in place the practice of really saying the first 2 years are the only years that we're fully committing to the funds, and hence this problem kind of came out of that structure, I guess, that the TPO created, that we're wanting to use the first 2 years as truly the only committed funds. But in order for us to put in an application for Smart Scale, in a future year, we really have to commit to that. And, we've run across this now. I think this is the second time. We had some previous kind of challenges with this. So that's probably something for us to look at in terms of an overall process. Likewise, I know in VDOT with the Commonwealth Transportation Board, they have adopted a structure through which administrative changes, where you're not actually changing the overall commitment to a project, but you're changing the year in which the dollars are coming from. They've granted to the staff the ability to take those actions and put that on the consent agenda of the next scheduled meeting. So it allows administratively things to take place and would avoid, say, emergency meeting like this in a scenario of this type. I think both of those issues are probably worth evaluation and consideration for maybe adjustments in the year ahead when we feel is, business wise and timely, prudent to do so. But I think there's probably some improved practices and maybe some additional administrative flexibility that can help for a situation like this in the future.
Thank you, Mr. King. Does anyone else have any additional comments?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I agree with Mr. King. We need flexibility in that policy that guides us on how we're going to do that. So I think maybe that's something our committee, along with Wayne, can look at those type of procedures where we can handle something like this. And I like that idea, Ken, where the staff has been given the latitude to be able to shift funds around without having to go back to a more formal procedure. So I like that's a good idea.
Yeah. Wayne, sounds like this might be a moment in time to take a pause and ask staff to go back and review the language and work with Mr. Radford, Mr. King, and come up with some language that allows that flexibility going forward so we avoid these special call meetings on short.
Yes, sir. We can certainly do that.
You think you can have something by December 10th meeting, or is that too challenging?
Well, I'm not sure. We'd like to look it over. I mean, there are issues, for instance, does the staff have the administrative ability to move money, to actually change the amount of money, or, we want to make sure we do it, do it right. So I'm not sure about December 10th, but certainly by January.
In my former employment, there used to be a force majeure clause in all contracts, and you hoped you never had to use it, but there's always that one time you do, and we've had two this year. So
Yes,
you can call it the 2020 year of the COVID or whatever, but and this might not happen again for the next 10 years, but it certainly would be nice to. We look forward to hearing what staff comes up with for a recommendation.
yes, sir.
There being no further comments, I want to wish everyone on the call a happy Thanksgiving and a safe one. And look forward to seeing everybody on December the 10th at our December meeting. With that in mind, I'll accept a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay,
Right.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Happy Thanksgiving and stay safe, everybody.
Yep. Everybody go